All right. Marifica. Oh, there you are, Katia.
I was trying to see how many people have left.
Good morning, all. We're having technical difficulties in the Legion room. Thank you so much for your patience. So is everybody on?
Who's a candidate?
Just message everybody, in case I couldn't hear you. for some reason.
Just do join meeting. Join a meeting
Well, I already did. A minute.
and then give her the thing.
No, you heard?
What was text out this
Oh,
morning,
okay.
the link.
Okay.
We have people in the Legion room, so we're working on getting them on. So thank you guys so much for your patience.
Come to visit you.
All right, fabulous. Thank you guys for being so patient. I think we have about 6 people in the Legion room, and we wanted to make sure that they could participate. So,
This one or?
No, on the
Okay.
TV.
All right.
you might have to mute yourselves, guys, because we can hear you. All right, so let's get started while they figure out up front how to mute. So today we're gonna do on the contract, so now what? And I want this to be interactive, especially with the agents in the room who had transactions, right? So we're gonna cover, of course, the buyer side, and I'll also cover the seller's side. So I'm on the contract, now what? Before I go on the contract, how do we know we're on the contract? Somebody unmute and just say, how do you know you're on the contract?
When we have signed and binding contract agreement,
Absolutely. Okay. So who binds the contract?
last party, I think, that agrees to it.
Last party that agrees to it. Okay. So the last party with all the signatures in place. So if I send you you sent me a counter, right? So yes or no, Ayub? So Ayub, you sent me a counter and I accept the counter and then I send it back to you and you bind it. Okay. All right, so let's talk about some of the things. Now that we're on the contract, here is the very first thing you want to do is make sure everybody gets a copy of that contract. And if I'm going to be totally honest with you guys, my first response, this was going to be about a 5-minute class, because I would say, I'm on the contract. Now, what should you do? You should immediately turn your contract over to a transaction coordinator. And of course, I'm going to make it a longer class, and I'm going to tell you all the things that go into it once you're on the contract. And at the end, I will ask you the question, right? Does it make sense for you to do all of this or just turn it over to a transaction coordinator? So, okay, we're on the contract. We've sent a copy of the contract to everybody that's involved in the transaction. So who should get a copy of the contract? You're saying something wonderful and you're on mute.
The buyer, the seller, and closing attorney.
Right, and the other side, right? So the listing agent, the buyer, the seller, the closing attorney, and we left out a very important person.
Mortgage broker.
Right, assuming that there's a loan involved and it's not cash. And so if you're going to use a transaction coordinator, which I highly recommend that, because that's not in the 5 things that we do, you go on the contract and you send that out to them and they send it out to everybody else. All right. So now that you're on the contract, you're going to make sure, of course, that we upload that into Command and we move our opportunity in Command to under contract. And this is not a class about Command. We have several classes on our Quantrain about how you get your contract into Command and submit it to the office. This is just, I'm on the contract now, what the heck do I do? All right, so move your opportunity to on the contract in Command. For me, when I was doing these by myself, and now that I have an assistant, she puts all of the important dates for the transaction on the calendar, right? She puts the binding agreement date on my calendar. She puts the earnest money date on my calendar. When it's due, she puts the due diligence date on my calendar. The financing contingency ends. When does it end? Appraisal contingency and the closing date. And they're just there as placeholders for me to see them because I don't do anything. All right, so now that you're on the contract, most of the time, and I know agents are really guilty of this, we don't send out the commission to the confirmation of commission so you get paid until we're on the contract, because we're so busy negotiating that sometimes we forget. So I want you guys to send confirmation to the other side so you get paid, because that is part of what goes to the closing attorney, the mortgage lender. Have I lost anybody so far? I've lost you, Ayub, or we're together. I'm telling you, you're a genius and we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm just a little bit confused about the last part.
Yeah, what part?
What confirmation? I mean, is it a separate paper that we send to?
Yes, yeah. To make sure you get paid. It's called close it, what is it? Commission confirmation, instructions to the closing attorney. And on that sheet is gonna say that the total commission is 6%, and the listing agent agrees to share 3% with the buyer's agent. So that one is signed only between you and the listing agent.
Okay, great.
Because
Thank you.
remember, we're covering the buyer side, and you would make sure that's part of your packet that goes out to everybody.
Great. Thank you.
All right, good. Okay. So what happens next? What happens next is, and you should have done this the minute you go on the contract, is to set your inspection or inspections. In this market, we're having really tight, like I'm seeing 3-day inspections, I'm seeing 0 inspections. I do not recommend that you do 0 inspection. Because it will come back to bite you. I had one woman call me. She was not my client. We had a conversation because she was recommended to me. And this was last month. She was in tears. And she's like, this was supposed to be my dream home. I am so sorry I bought this house. She was crying and she was telling me all of the issues that an inspector did not catch. Now, can you imagine recommending your clients not to do an inspection and then they have all of that issue? Guess who they're coming after? They're coming after you. So I just say this, set up the inspection as soon as you can. There's some inspectors who have really great turnaround time. So that is the very next step. Once everything is done, and quite frankly, if you think you're nearing the point where everybody's going to agree and you're going to go on the contract, I would call my favorite inspector and say, hey, I haven't signed all the paperwork yet. I think it's going to happen. Can we just set a tentative time on your calendar? And once we go binding, then I'll pull the trigger on that. We've got very good partners in this office that will do that. Any questions so far? All right, so we're past the inspection once we negotiate. So that's the first contingency. The second contingency, usually it's your earnest money. Now, the earnest money has to be in the office in the time that you said it was going to be in the office. So if it's 3 days, then make sure it's in the office within 3 days. Here's what I did back in the old days. We would have an earnest money check on hold in the office for my clients. Because I would say it's our intention to buy a house today. Let's go ahead and write an earnest money check. And if it's 300,000, it's usually 1% or more in this market. So we would have that check at the office, and the office holds it until I tell them what property to apply it to. So instead of chasing somebody down and it's like the very last day for the earnest money check and they're in Gwinnett and you're over here, just go ahead and get that check when you guys are filling out the paperwork. Does that make sense? All right, come off mute and ask me some questions because this is interactive, remember?
Hi, Authurine, it's Melissa. I have a question about the earnest money.
Yes.
So I was talking to another quant agent this weekend, and there are stipulations for some offers where you have to have more than 1% or 2% of the earnest money. So what would be in this market a good option for earnest money? 1%, 3%? Do you understand?
So it depends on your comfort level with your client.
Okay.
Because let's say they're putting 20% down, right?
Yes.
They're putting 20% down. What would, and it's a, okay, let's assume it's a $500,000 house. Why not put up a $10,000 earnest money?
Okay.
Because
Okay.
it's part of their commission anyway.
Yeah.
And here's why you want to encourage them to do that.
Mhm.
We're going to protect their earnest money, right? So you've got three
Yes.
different times that they can walk away and get their earnest money back. Everybody know the 3 different times?
No.
Okay, all right. So inspection, no agreement within the due diligence period, you can walk away, get your earnest money back. If the house doesn't, if for some reason they can't get financing and it wasn't their fault, they didn't do anything deliberate, within the financing period, they can get their earnest money back. If the house doesn't appraise and they cannot come to an agreement with the seller, then they can get their earnest money back. So now, if I have a big earnest money and everything's going on along swimmingly well, and I just decide, you know what, I don't like that house. People are not going to usually walk away from a $10,000 or a $50,000 earnest money check because they think they don't like it, right? They'll walk away from a $1,000 check every day of the week because I've had that happen to me. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Very good question. All right. So where are we? So we've done our inspection. What else? We've done our inspection and we've negotiated all the inspection items. Now here's a tip. Are we gonna ask for light bulbs and little things that are missing, or are we gonna ask for big things?
Big things.
Thanks.
Big things. Okay, so here's what I tell my buyers, right? So it's 2 different conversations. I tell my buyers, we're not gonna ask for tiny little things that a handyman can do. We're gonna ask for huge things. Like we're gonna ask for maybe a deck to be reinforced, that's big, and brought up to code. Any code items, anything that has to do with electrical or plumbing, then we want to make sure the seller fixes that. One thing we want to do is get under agreement fast before we run out of time. As a listing agent, I just despise when, and I say that, and I know it's on tape, and I do. When a buyer's agent send me the ATAC, which is the amendment to address concerns, on the day of. The day that the due diligence is gonna end at midnight. Do you know why that's inconvenient for all parties involved?
Because an opportunity to look at how much it's going to cost them and negotiate, really.
Absolutely right, Deja. I mean, it doesn't, if you're asking me for plumbing and electrical and all of this stuff, I have less than a day in which to get my guys out there if I'm representing the seller, right? Get the seller's people out there, or call Drew or another inspector and say, here's what we have. Give me an estimate of how much it's gonna cost. And you expect me to get back to you before 12 midnight, right? So for my buyers, the conversation is we've got to get this over to them as quickly as possible and ask them to fix every big thing. For my sellers, right, and we're doing the seller side as along with the buyer side, here's what I'm telling my seller. Let's get to a dollar amount and offer them a dollar amount. And the reason behind this is, When you're enjoying your new home in the Caribbean or in Florida or wherever you are up north, right? They're gonna call me if we have all of this stuff fixed by your person, Mr. Seller. And if you give them money, I'm not gonna get that call because the buyer's handyman contractor, they're gonna take care of that work. So it's always with your seller, hey, throw money at it. With your buyer, you can say, you can have the same conversation. You can tell your buyers, hey, you know what? I think the best bet for us to go here is for you to hire your own contractors. Let's come up with a dollar amount. Or I can send a list of what needs to be fixed to my contractor and get a dollar amount, and we'll ask the seller for that. So how do we want to ask for the money? Do we want to ask for closing costs? Or do we want to ask to reduce the sales price?
It was one better than the other,
Oh, absolutely, ma'am.
so reduction in sales price? No?
Anybody else?
What's your question, Ms. Authurine?
So we're at the point where we are in the midst of negotiating the repairs. And so do we want to reduce sales price if they're agreeable to giving us an amount? Or do we want to have the seller pay for some closing costs for our buyers?
Oh, give us contribution towards closing.
And why is that, madam?
That's what I usually ask for. It just seems to make sense.
Does it
Yeah.
allow them to have more cash to go get those things fixed on their own?
There you go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me explain the reasoning why behind that. So if, let's say I ask for $5,000 in closing costs, right? As opposed to asking for, no, 10, let's do 10, right? $10,000 in closing costs from a buyer. So that's $10,000 less that they have to come out of pocket at closing for my buyer, right? Or I say reduce the sales price by $10,000. So in the mortgage, do you know how much that is?
$100 or so?
You wish.
Yeah, it's not even that.
As a general rule of thumb, $10,000 gonna cost them $10 to $20.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you just gave you by, yeah. So let's have the real cash money records, right? Instead of reducing the sales price.
I have a question. When do you factor in possibly asking for that home warranty as an option? When is that a good idea?
I either ask for it up front as we're touring the house. If we're touring the house and we're looking at the heater and we see that it's a very old water heater, right? And I know that they're not gonna fix it. And we're looking outside at the AC and I see where it's rusty looking. And based on the inspection report, I might ask upfront even before we do an inspection report, in this kind of climate, because I want to go under contract. I'm having two conversations, right, Deja? It's, hey, based on the inspection report, it looks like the water heater has about 3 or 4 years left. So let's, two things. We can ask them to fix it, replace it. Or look, we need them to do some things with the electrical. Which one do you want to buy your own home warranty, which is about $450, $600? Or do you want them to fix the electrical, which is thousands of dollars? All right. So you kind of,
Because like I said, as is home, is that for a buyer looking at an as is home, would that be something that a seller would consider? So that they aren't coming out of pocket necessarily a huge dollar amount, but it allows the buyer to feel confident that if something does break down in the as is home, they could get it fixed potentially.
yes, yeah.
And today, Drew, the inspector just told me, he said that because the weather was not above 65 degrees. He said that they couldn't check the HVAC, so I can also ask for that home warranty too. I said, oh, that was, yeah, found that out.
Absolutely, yeah. And that would be the reasoning that you would give the listing agent. Hey, we don't know for sure what's going on with the AC, so we're gonna ask for a home warranty so my buyers can feel comfortable. All right, good conversation around that. Okay, all right. One piece I missed, and that was asking for the CBS code from the agent. Sometimes the inspectors will call and get it. I like getting the CBS code from the listing agent if it's not in private remarks, so I can give it to the inspector. All right, all right, so. All right. Okay, so once you've negotiated the ATAC, I know I've been guilty of this before. I forget to send it to everybody, right? So it now becomes a part of the contract and it goes again. Who does it go to? Everybody that's involved in the transaction. Make sense? All right, cool. So we've gone through that. Now, everybody has a copy. Here's what's happening in the background that you need to keep an eye on. There's a buyer's information sheet that's going to go out from the closing attorney. That can slow your closing down if the buyer does not fill it out. So remind them within a couple of days that, hey, you're going to get an email from the closing attorney with a buyer information sheet. Please go ahead and fill that out immediately. You're also having the conversation too that in this market where wire fraud is rampant, you will get emails asking you to wire money to some account. When you do, I want you to pick up the phone and call the closing attorney and verify that it came from them, and then verify the account number. This is really, really important, guys. Really, really important, because once that money goes, once they wire it and it goes off to wherever it goes, there's nothing that closing attorney can do. That money is gone. Questions? All right. I'm going to assume that we're good, and then I'm going to go on. All right. Okay. So when do we pay for the appraisal?
After the due diligence ends, you request it, I should say.
Well,
So
that would, and that's why I asked this question, Kadia, too, because you know what? That would have been a great answer. Or maybe 2 years ago. Right now, if I know for sure that this is their home, that they love it, we're going to pray for the appraisal as soon as we go on the contract.
Oh, wow, okay.
As soon as we go on the contract.
Okay.
And that again is a conversation with your buyer. Hey, do you love this house? Is this house the one, or is this a house that we just grabbed because there's nothing out there? And if they say, we love this house, we're going to live in this house, right? We're not walking away. Then I'm having that conversation. We need to pay for the appraisal right away, because we want to make sure that the appraisal is not the thing that delays the closing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, good to know.
Okay, good. All right. So tick questions. Any more questions?
Okay, yeah. That was really helpful, Ms. Authurine, because I literally have 2 contracts now. I was waiting until the due diligence end, but this is good because I'm literally going to tell the lenders who can go ahead and order their appraisal now because they love the home. So thank you.
All right, you are welcome. Okay, so we've gone through the whole transaction and we've set for the closing. Now, Kadiatu, what must you do? We're assuming that the appraisal came back in and everything's fine. What must you do 3 days before? Well, and I will do this 4 days before the closing. To
Well,
make,
are you talking about the buyers checking the email for the, from the attorneys to make sure they sign the documents?
yes,
Okay.
3 days.
The question?
It's law, state law, right? 3 days, well, it's not really state law, but it's a mortgage law that 3 days before the closing, they've got to review that closing document and they have to physically email, not physically, they have to acknowledge that they've seen it and that the numbers make sense. So that's 3 days before we go to closing. One of the things as the buyer's advisor, I would be advising them to make sure that if their money is coming from out of state, Kadiatu, and this has happened, Michelle talked about that at sales meeting. If their money is at a small bank out of state, some of those banks physically want you to be in the bank when you do the wire transfer. So they should know ahead of time, right? If you have a bank here in Georgia and that's fine. But if your money is in Michigan, you might have to get on a plane. And is that okay, right? Have that conversation up front if you have an out-of-state buyer, because what we'd want to do is have an account here and have them move money like months, at least a month ahead of time into that account so it can clear. Does that make sense?
The document that's coming, it's the document that's coming from the attorney, right? That 3 days before?
It's from the mortgage company.
The lender, okay.
It's from the lender. Mm-hmm. All right,
So
but do you guys understand?
If you have a transaction coordinator, aren't they doing that part for you? Making sure that they're reviewed, or do you need to do that?
Oh, wonderful question. Yes, your transaction coordinator will do all of that for you because you are having the conversation with them before.
Okay.
All right. Yes, and I'll show you all what they do at the end. I'll show you some of the things, all that they do. All right. What about, okay, so utilities. Don't forget that part, right? That they're going to have to transfer all the utilities into their name.
I told my buyer recently that they should try to start looking at that a week out, just so they can know who the utility company is and don't wait to the 9th hour and they don't have lights on when they walk in the house. So even if they don't do it, I just want them to have it in their head to start looking into it a week out. So I provided them the utility companies and all that this week so that they can start looking at it going into next week before they move in.
All right, so usually that's part of the seller information that I will provide the utility information sheet in FMLS docs. If you look in FMLS docs and it's not there, then I want you to have that once you go on the contract or somewhere while you're going through, because I know it's a lot of things. Once you're going through the transaction, just reach out to the seller's lender. We've got that utility information form in our documents on the intranet. Just send that over to the seller's agent and ask them to fill it out for you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So technically, if it's like a townhome or condo to where you have HOA, when should the seller send over their confidence from the HOA, the seller's agent?
Send over the what?
The confidence, the docs from the HOA, when should they send that over to you?
Great question. Guess who is responsible for that?
The buyer's agent?
The buyer's agent.
Oh, I showed it, ask her for it. She told me she'll send it to me.
Yeah, she will. And if I have it as a listing agent, I'll sell it. I'll send it. And
It
if
should
they
be on-
don't, then it's your job to make sure that the information that was provided regarding the HOA, whoever runs the HOA, or if it's a company, that
Okay.
you go out to them and you get that information.
Okay, because when I try to order it before, it's easier for the seller to get it than for the, so at least like,
Yes, it is. And there's certain documents that the seller has to pay for to get to you. And if you're asking for the covenants and stuff like that, then that they don't have to pay for. And if they say we don't have it, then it's easy for you to go get it.
okay.
Okay? All right. So are we at the end?
No,
Okay, almost. We're almost there. The only thing left is to get to the closing table. Now, it's your buyer, so I'm assuming, and we'll come back to this, I'm assuming we have the earnest money check, right? If we have the earnest money check, then you know what to do. You send out the request for the earnest money check to Noel. About 72 hours before you close, Noel will put that check in your box, you pick it up and you take it to closing. If you don't pick it up, don't take it to closing, don't worry. The closing still happens and they'll deduct that $10,000 from your earnest money. I mean, from your payment at closing. And then once you turn the check in, you'll get your proper commission. Now,
can you
Yes,
explain
slow
that
down.
one more time, a
Yeah.
little slower, because I am totally, all of mine have gone through attorney, like this transaction is going through the attorney, but in a scenario of it going to our office and the check is sitting here,
mhm,
I assumed that the check was in escrow in an account. So you're
Yes.
saying that Noel then write the check out of the escrow account for me to pick up and then take to closing?
yes,
Why wouldn't it just automatically just go to the closing office as some kind of payment as a transaction to the attorney? Like, I guess I'm just trying to follow why our office wouldn't send it to the closing office directly.
because, and we don't wire, can you imagine wiring earnest money checks for, let's say, how many agents do we have? 340 agents. Well, just split that in half. Let's say 180 of you are doing closings that month.
Mhm.
I mean, and you don't have to pick it up, right? You don't have to pick it up. I like personally picking up my own earnest money check and walking it to close. If you don't pick it up, nothing happens. You're still gonna get paid from the office the correct amount.
But
So
then,
you have an option not to pick it up.
So when you take it to the spot, so you pick the check up, you take it to closing, then the attorney's office then does a debit or credit?
Don't worry about that part. It's part
Okay.
of it's part of your buyer's down payment.
Okay, it's part of the buyer's down payment.
Part
so
of
they-
buyer's down payment. Don't worry about how it shows up.
Okay,
I have a question too, because I haven't really, I think I did the earnest money to do once. So when you, like today, literally, I'm gonna pick up the earnest money check from a client. When I bring the check back, the
Mhm.
steps are, do I upload? I have not, I've heard it.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, okay. How did I miss that part? So once you pick up the check, you want to make a copy of the check
Okay.
because everybody gets a copy again, right? The physical check gets put into an envelope and turns into the office. The copies go out to everybody involved and you upload a copy of the earnest money check into Command. Okay. Good.
Wait, it's gonna be loaded up into Command PDF. So you gotta
Mm-hmm.
do it, bring it in like, okay, yes, thank you.
Yeah. You
this is
upload it in
the reason
Command.
why I write a transaction
PDF.
coordinator. This is all the reasons why. Just like-
I know, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. All right, so
Don't want people to get those steps.
the day of closing or the day before closing, just confirm with your client that they've wired their money into the closing attorney, the day before closing.
What money they're wiring, the down payment?
They are wiring all of their down payment, they're wiring their closing amount.
And their
It's
down,
not just the down payment, Deja.
it's the
it's the-
closing.
It's the closing amount that's on their sheet, their settlement sheet. They're wiring that into the attorney's office the day before. It's just too much. It works the morning of. From personal experience, I prefer it to be there the day before. Okay, and we can talk offline about all the heartaches of wiring it the morning of and it not getting to the closing attorney. Because somebody has done an ACH instead of a wire. And it has to be a wire, not an ACH. Okay. All right, so personally what I do, I know everything's electronic and my clients have an electronic file. I still print up a copy based on the conversation with my clients. Do you want a physical copy or are you okay with me emailing it to you? If they say they're okay emailing it, then I'll email it. My standard is that I'll print it up and I'll have a nice closing folder. And I'll take that to closing with a copy of all the documents, including my exclusive buyer agreement. So I'll take that to closing. The paperwork that they get from the closing attorney also goes into my binder. And here's what I tell them. Keep everything in this folder. When you get a copy of the deed, from Cobb County or from the county, put a copy of that deed in the folder because when you call me to sell this house in 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and I ask you for a copy of the deed, I want you to just go pick up this folder that I've given you. Okay, and of course it has our logo on it and my name and all kinds of stuff on it.
So what all are you putting in that folder, when you take it to closing or something, right?
The entire contract.
Okay.
The entire contract and receipts. Now we talked about getting money, right? So there are no receipts, right? If we have receipts from stuff that the seller has fixed that are requested that we get that 3 days or 5 days before we go to closing, I have all the receipts in that folder. So it's the contract, it's receipts, it's my exclusive, and then the paperwork that the paperwork that the closing attorney gives at closing. And then once they get their deed, we'll put it in that folder. Questions so far? All right, no questions. Okay, so what do we do afterwards? Because we're not finished. I know it's under contract, now what? So we finished the under contract, now what part of it? Let's talk about continuing the relationship with the client, not just the buyer, right? The seller also. So add them to your Homeversary Smart Plan. So you don't miss a home anniversary. And your smart plan, I'm not going to get into details of the smart plan. It can look however you want it to look. You can have an email touch associated with it. You can have a text associated. And of course, the wonderful Homeversary card that goes out. We just buy a whole bunch of Homeversary cards at the top of the year and we keep them. And we send them out every year. Well, I don't. Imani sends it out every year.
What about the gift? I know that's may
Oh,
not be.
you were gonna ask about a gift. Well, it just depends on my buyer. Some people have, they buy bulk things and some of the ideas I love. I like listening to my buyer as we're going through the house. They're oohing and eyeing and, oh my God, I'm gonna get a nice whatever for this. I might get them that nice whatever. Like I surprised my young buyers because he kept talking about, how much he does all of the cooking and he needs some nice knives. And so I surprised them at closing with a nice knife set. And I think he was more excited about the set, the knives, than he was about the house itself. So yeah, the reason why I don't buy bulk things is because I just like surprising them with stuff that they actually want.
I think that's a great idea. I just didn't know how you would figure out what they wanted, because if you're listening to them, they don't really mention anything particularly. It's hard to figure out what's a good gift.
There's
Mhm.
a buyer sheet in the Connie Davidson to do questionnaire, and you can get that and send it out to them to fill it up so they can learn more, and then you can buy gifts based on that. Like the little Connie Davidson do it. Yeah.
And here's an idea that I heard that I really love, and I might do it this year. Have 2 different baskets for a new home person. After the walkthrough, the builders usually go through and just take everything out, including the toilet paper. Why are you taking the toilet paper out, right? So have a basket with toilet paper, hand towels, sanitizers,
That's a good
stuff,
idea.
right? One other agent I know, she has for her buyers, she always has a basket with breakfast items for the next day. Like she has pancakes and the syrup and towels and it's just stuff so they can make breakfast for the next day.
That's a good idea.
Mhm.
What do you do? We didn't say when we're supposed to do the walkthrough. Did we say that?
You know what? Do it the morning of. Mhm.
If your closing is at 9 in the morning, then you can't. You should do the day before.
The night before. Yeah. And hopefully they won't have a leak on the day that you're closing. All right. So yeah, I like doing it the morning of or the night before, so I can catch some things. I used to, when I would teach this class, I would say, do it 3 days before. And then Liz Cohen had a walkthrough the morning. Actually, she left the closing to run to the house to do something. And thank God she did. She had to call and stop the closing. Like water just coming through, like a waterfall.
Okay, can you
Multi-million-dollar
explain
house.
how that works though? If that is a situation which you pray never happens, can you really stop a closing off of something like that?
Mhm. Yeah.
Would
You don't technically stop it, but the money is put in escrow.
but what, I mean, I'm just trying to understand what legal back.
That's a off topic,
Okay.
Deja. We'll talk about that offline, and you can talk to Liz Cohen about how they did it.
Okay,
Yeah, because you have to stop the closing, because
Okay.
the house is not the way you saw it when you went on the contract.
gotcha.
And the contract says it has to be how you saw it when you went on the contract.
Okay,
All right, and you didn't see a waterfall coming through the kitchen ceiling when you went on the contract.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So don't forget, you want to upload your settlement statement into Command and upload any amendments signed at closing into Command, right? Ask your clients to write a review for you on Google. And this is beyond the contract. This is after closing. And then we'll talk about marketing, which is a whole different class that Christy did around your sale. Any questions so far? Anything that I did not cover that I should have covered?
This was really good.
Thank you very much. And I am now going to share my screen and show you why you should not do any of this.
Oh, Ms. Authurine, is there a checklist? Is a checklist somewhere in
There's one in the document.
It's right behind you, Kadiatu.
behind me? Okay.
Yep, I've got a buyer checklist and I've got a seller checklist, and they're right behind you in that red thing on the wall.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
All right. Do you see the lift contract to close?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, cool. So here's all that they do, and I covered most of it. And I'll tell you what you will do when you do contract to close. So the way contract to close work, it works just like we do. They get paid at closing, right? So if you go on a contract and somebody changes their mind, you don't get paid. Same thing with contract to close. They'll do all the work for you and they get paid at closing. So you put them on your DA like a vendor. Right on where you put FMLS, this is where the lift contract to close people would go, right? So here are all the services that they'll do for you and much, much more. And then the contract to close, that's in our office. There are tons of contract to close people. These people have a post-close system where they stay in touch with your buyer. Your buyer gets a bottle of champagne at the closing and a card. And they also have a smart plan where they stay in touch. I think it's a 12 direct touch where every month your buyer gets something from Lyft and you. So if you're wondering how to stay in touch, once you close through these people, they have a smart plan. All right. So when you're doing it by yourself, you do everything else that I just talked about, and I'm going to stop sharing. When you go through the Lyft program or any transaction closing, you go on the contract, you hand it to them. The next time you see the contract or have to do anything on it really is when you're negotiating the ATAC. We call it ATAC. It's the amendment to address concerns. Once that's binded, you just send that over to them and they stay in touch with all the contingencies and the days that things are due, and you go ahead and you get 5 other things on the contract. You're not babying one contract. Does that make sense? So you're working in your 20%, and that is what we just covered is the 80% of our business that you should always leverage and run your business like a business. Questions? None? Okay. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Zoya. Who else? Lamar, Melissa. Was this helpful for you guys?
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Very helpful.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, great. Well, go have a great lunch.
Thank you. Thank you, Authurine.
And if you want this, well, actually, you should have the buyer checklist and the seller's checklist. And if you got the 30, 60, 90 agent success plan, they're in there. And if not, they're always in the lead gen room.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.